The envelope sat centered on the mahogany desk when I entered. No greeting, no pretense, just crisp white paper with my name laser printed across the front like a medical diagnosis. Effective today, Andrew said without lifting his eyes from his laptop screen. You've been reassigned to project coordinator. Salary has been revised to reflect the new position. That was it. No appreciation. No acknowledgement. Just a title I'd never heard anyone hold and a 65% reduction in compensation that would barely cover my mortgage. I didn't flinch. I couldn't, not because the shock hadn't hit, but because something sharper had already settled into my spine. My name is Olivia Randall. I'm 41 years old and until 9 minutes ago, I was the Executive Director of International Aerospace Acquisitions at Vanguard Aviation Systems. 7 days earlier, I finalized the largest contract in the company's 40-year history. A $1.35 billion order for 5 ultra-long-range executive jets from a Belgian investment consortium. 11 months of sleepless negotiations, currency hedging nightmares, regulatory labyrinths across 3 continents, and I handled every detail personally. I should have been in the boardroom with champagne. Instead, I sat across from a man who wouldn't even acknowledge what I'd accomplished. 30 minutes before this meeting, I stood outside this same office, reviewing implementation timelines on my tablet. The door swung open and Natalie emerged first, confident, polished, barely 32, walking like she'd already claimed victory. I knew her well. Ambitious, charismatic, and wildly inexperienced. I had personally mentored her through her graduate internship 3 summers ago. Behind her came Andrew, smiling wider than I'd seen in months. They shook hands with the ease of old friends sealing a private arrangement. Neither noticed me standing there watching everything unfold. Now here I was, holding a document dated yesterday, informing me that the position I had built from nothing no longer belonged to me. They hadn't just stripped my authority. They had erased me with surgical precision, and they'd done it a full day before they told me. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my leather portfolio and stood without a word. This wasn't the moment to protest. It was the moment to observe. Every face, every movement, every choice. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. They believed this was finished, but the signature on that contract was still fresh. My nameplate had disappeared. Not relocated, not misspelled, simply removed. Where it once declared Olivia Randall, Executive Director, on brushed steel beside the corner office door, there was now only blank wall and adhesive residue. I stood there longer than I meant to, caught between disbelief and something colder. That office, my sanctuary for 12 years at Vanguard, was no longer mine to enter. A young analyst rushed past, juggling file folders and a Starbucks cup tower. She stopped when she saw me staring at the empty doorframe. "Can I help you find someone?" she asked, friendly but clearly not recognizing me. I forced a smile that felt like swallowing glass. "No, I know exactly where I am." I turned away, gripping the edges of a corrugated box labeled Olivia Arda, personal items by someone in human resources who couldn't be bothered to spell out my full name. Down 7 floors. Past cubicles I hadn't seen since my junior analyst days when I worked 80-hour weeks to prove I belonged. That's where they'd put me now. Not an office. Not even a decent cubicle. A workstation with particle board dividers, no window, no phone line, and a fluorescent bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. Someone had shoved a tangled Ethernet cable into the drawer. The space smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. A sticky note clung to the monitor. "Olivia, we'll get you set up soon." HR. I lowered myself into the cheap swivel chair and scanned my surroundings. Across the narrow hallway, mounted behind plexiglass, hung the newly updated organizational chart. Glossy, laminated, already distributed company-wide. I walked over slowly, searching for my name anywhere on the hierarchy. It wasn't there. Not at the top, not in the middle tiers, not even buried in the footnotes under project contributors. Natalie Brennan's headshot occupied my former position. The caption beneath her professionally lit photo read, "Leading Vanguard into a bold new era of global aviation dominance." I closed my eyes and felt the weight of what they'd done. This wasn't just replacement. It was annihilation. Every email I'd sent, every strategy I'd architected, every all-nighter I'd survived, erased as though I'd never existed. That afternoon, a communications intern appeared at my workstation, arms loaded with presentation binders destined for the executive suite. "Can you make sure these reach Natalie before tomorrow's leadership review?" she asked, already turning to leave. I nodded mechanically and accepted the stack. As she walked away, I noticed one binder had a loose page protruding from the edge. I pulled it free. A printed slide deck titled Brussels Contract Finalization. Team Lead, Olivia Randall. My photograph was there, taken moments after the signing ceremony. I remembered that day vividly. The relief, the exhaustion, the brief illusion that my work mattered. But someone had taken a red marker and drawn a thick X across my face. Literally crossed me out. The final version of the deck had been reprinted with Natalie's name and image in my place. I returned to my workstation, opened the filing cabinet beneath the flimsy desk, and flipped through rows of meticulously organized binders, documentation I had created, color-coded, annotated with notes from every stage of negotiation. Except now, every tab that once read, or had been overwritten in hasty ballpoint pen with NB. Olivia Randall had vanished. Natalie Brennan had claimed her legacy. I closed the drawer gently, sat motionless, and let the silence settle around me like snowfall. I didn't weep. I didn't scream. I simply absorbed the truth. What hurt most wasn't losing the office, the title, or even the recognition. It was realizing how effortlessly they had done it. And then I understood something crucial, something that felt like ice forming in my veins. If they could erase me this quickly, they had never planned to keep me at all. I didn't sleep for 11 months. I can trace it back to the first message I sent at 2:47 a.m. to the initial contact at the Belgian firm, all the way to the final video conference that stretched past 1 a.m. in Brussels. I was the only person holding the pieces of that $1.35 billion deal together. And now, sitting in a cubicle with someone else's initials scrawled over my work, I wondered how they had forgotten so fast. Well, they hadn't forgotten. They'd simply never cared to understand. There were nights I reviewed avionics specifications on the bathroom floor of a Frankfurt airport hotel, eyes burning from exhaustion and jet lag. There were mornings I joined conference calls from a hospital bed after collapsing from dehydration and stress-induced arrhythmia. And there was one evening in late November, 3 days before Thanksgiving, when I sat alone in a gate lounge watching my father's call come through. I let it go to voicemail. I missed our traditional family dinner for the first time in 19 years. He said he understood when I finally called back. But I heard the disappointment underneath his words. I gave Vanguard everything. Every waking hour, every sacrifice, every version of myself I had to rebuild after each failure. And when Hyperion Aerospace, our biggest competitor, approached me 4 months ago with an offer to run their European expansion team, I declined immediately. "I'm committed to Vanguard," I told them. They offered equity packages and signing bonuses that would have changed my life. I said no. I walked back into my corner office, closed the door, and kept working on the Belgian contract. That contract was my oxygen, my proof, my future. I handcrafted every clause, anticipated every legal challenge, navigated cultural expectations that legal couldn't grasp, and at the heart of the entire agreement was Section 9, subsection D. It wasn't part of the original template. Legal hadn't suggested it. It came during a private dinner in Antwerp when the client's chief operating officer leaned across the table and said quietly, "We've been burned before by companies who replace their negotiators midstream. We need assurance. If you're not leading the implementation, this deal is worthless to us." So I wrote the clause myself, quietly, without telling Andrew or Natalie. I kept the language simple and direct. Post-contract operational oversight shall remain under Olivia Randall. In the event of personnel reassignment, the client reserves the right to terminate this agreement without penalty. They signed without question. We celebrated with Belgian chocolate and handshakes. And now, the very protection I'd written to honor the client's trust had become my only weapon. Buried in plain sight. Unread by people too arrogant to believe I was irreplaceable. I leaned back in the creaking chair, hands folded tightly in my lap. Not from anger but from absolute clarity. They thought they had stolen my deal. But I had never given it away. Betrayal has a way of echoing backward. Sitting in that gray workstation, staring at Natalie's name on documents I had bled to create, my mind kept circling back to one specific night. The night I had felt truly valued. And it hadn't been at Vanguard. It had been in Antwerp. The final phase of negotiations had pushed everyone to the breaking point. Legal teams clashed over jurisdiction. Engineering kept changing technical specifications mid-process. The client's board was growing impatient, and the deal was hanging by threads no one else could even see. But I held them together. That Thursday evening, the CEO of the client firm, Laurent Dupont, sent me a message: "Dinner tonight. Just us. No agenda. 8 p.m. Rue de Teneurs." I hesitated. We still had unresolved language in 3 sections. But something in his tone made me accept. When I arrived at the quiet bistro tucked near the historic district, he was already seated. No assistants, no devices, just a glass of Bordeaux and folded hands. "I wanted to speak with you off the record," he began. "Not as executives. As human beings." I said nothing. I simply listened. He told me about their previous deal. A multinational aerospace contract worth over €1 billion that collapsed during implementation because the lead negotiator was suddenly removed. No warning, no explanation, no continuity. "It cost us 4 years and half our credibility," he said quietly. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "Olivia, we are not signing with Vanguard. We are signing with you. If you disappear, this deal disappears." In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not praise. Not performance reviews. Trust. Real human trust. I promised him I would see it through from beginning to end. That night, back in my hotel room, I found a handwritten envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a short note in elegant cursive. "To the one who earned our confidence through action, not position. We do not forget those who carry the weight with grace. L. Dupont." I kept that letter tucked inside my planner, hidden behind business cards and boarding passes. No one at Vanguard ever knew it existed. They wouldn't have cared anyway. But now, surrounded by silence and stolen credit, I unfolded that letter again. Creased but intact. They could replace my name on every chart in the building. But they could never recreate that night in Antwerp. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7:45 a.m. Earlier than usual. No one expected me to show up at all. After what they'd done, stripping my position, slashing my income, replacing my identity, they probably assumed I'd either vanish quietly or explode publicly. That's how most people respond to humiliation. But I came back. Hair pulled into a low bun, blazer pressed, expression neutral. And nobody knew what to do with me. Natalie passed my workstation once that morning. She didn't speak, just glanced sideways like she wasn't sure whether to acknowledge me or pretend I didn't exist. I gave her nothing. No smile, no hostility, no reaction. Across the floor, Andrew's door stayed half open. He hadn't spoken to me since the Demotion meeting. Not even a follow-up email. I caught his reflection once in the glass partition. He looked at me briefly, then looked away. I didn't chase them. I didn't demand meetings or explanations. Instead, I turned to my computer and began composing emails. Not resignation letters. Not job applications. Strategic inquiries. One by one, I reached out to former colleagues. People I trusted. Engineers I'd traveled across continents with. Procurement directors who owed me more than one deadline save. Even 2 former Vanguard executives now quietly leading divisions at rival firms. I didn't ask for favors. I asked questions. Careful ones. Strategic ones. If someone with deep aerospace regulatory experience were available next quarter, would that interest your team? Are you still managing post-contract integration workflows? How's morale on your international division lately? I wasn't planting seeds. I was testing soil conditions. That Friday afternoon, I received a call during lunch. Unknown number. Area code 646. New York City. "Olivia Randall?" the voice asked. Professional, measured. "Yes," I replied, glancing around the empty break room. "My name is Helena Cross. I'm an independent contract attorney specializing in international aerospace law. I just finished reviewing the agreement tied to the Vanguard DuPont jet transaction." I straightened in my chair. She continued, "I believe you authored Section 9, subsection D." "I did," I said carefully. There was a pause. Then, "It's bulletproof. Simple language, direct intent, enforceable in any international court. They have no idea what you gave them." I exhaled slowly. Something between relief and vindication settled in my chest. "They're blind," she added. That clause was the smartest part of the entire deal. And they've walked right past it. That evening I stayed late. Not working. Just observing. Natalie left early. Andrew never emerged from his office. I sat alone in that cramped workstation, bathed in the glow of a desktop monitor, with one hand resting lightly on the drawer that held the original signed contract. Still bearing my ink. Still carrying my initials. I said nothing. Sent no warnings. Offered no clues. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. Quietly. Confidently. Until the moment it's needed. And they had no idea I was still holding it. I didn't go to Belgium. Natalie did. She left on a Tuesday morning, gliding through Reagan National Airport's executive terminal like someone who'd earned the right. First-class ticket, tailored blazer, brand new Vanguard-issued leather portfolio that I'd once selected for senior-level travel. The irony wasn't lost on me. I heard through the grapevine that she smiled the entire way through security. I didn't wish her luck. I didn't say anything. Because I knew something she didn't. The client's headquarters sat in the heart of Brussels. A sleek glass and steel structure I knew intimately. I'd visited 4 times. I knew which cafe in the lobby had the best espresso, which elevator ran smoothly, and how Lauren's executive assistant preferred her documents formatted. By the time Natalie touched down at 9:37 a.m. local time, she'd already posted a professional selfie on LinkedIn with the caption, "Excited to strengthen Vanguard's global partnerships." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my name wasn't just attached to the signature page. It was woven into the architecture of the entire deal. The message arrived at Vanguard headquarters like a precision strike. At 3:18 p.m. Eastern, a formal email landed in the inboxes of Andrew, Natalie, legal, compliance, and the entire board of directors. Subject line, contract status, immediate attention required. The body was short, cold, surgical. Per Section 9, subsection D, this contract is contingent upon post-implementation oversight being conducted by Ms. Olivia Randall. We do not recognize substitutions or reassignments. No further meetings will be scheduled. It was signed by Laurent Dupont himself and copied to the firm's legal team, the board, and their external auditors. Just like that, the $1.35 billion handover ground to a halt. Because I wasn't in Brussels. And no one had bothered to ask me to be. I found out about the email when a junior project manager walked past my workstation. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He didn't say anything, but his expression told me everything. Within an hour, people started whispering. In conference rooms, elevator lobbies, Slack channels disguised as routine check-ins. No one said my name out loud. But they didn't need to. The story spread. Apparently, someone in corporate communications tried to draft a statement. Something neutral. A delay narrative. 10 minutes later, the draft was deleted and the entire thread was wiped. Rumor had it Andrew himself ordered the comms team to stay silent. But it was too late. The damage was done. I didn't need to be in that Brussels office. I didn't need to raise my voice or make demands. I just needed to wait. And I did. By 6:30 p.m. I was still at my desk. Cold coffee beside me, unread messages piling up in my inbox. Subject lines like, urgent clarification needed, client delay, action required, Section 9D, who drafted this? All of them sent in panic. None of them addressed directly to me. But I was in every sentence. Natalie didn't stop by the next morning. Andrew didn't call. But I overheard someone say she cried in the executive restroom on the 8th floor. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't care. Because I hadn't done anything except be remembered. And they had done everything to be forgotten. Now they were locked out of a deal I no longer had to defend. By 8:30 a.m. the following day, the executive floor was vibrating with tension. You could feel it through closed doors, hurried footsteps, raised voices, phones ringing nonstop. No one smiled. No one made small talk. I didn't need an invitation to know what was happening. Andrew had called an emergency leadership meeting. And I sat quietly downstairs, pretending to update a spreadsheet no one would ever review. The upper management at Vanguard was in full crisis mode. Phones didn't stop ringing. Legal locked themselves in a conference room. Public relations drafted and deleted 3 different press releases. And in the boardroom it was chaos. A former colleague who still owed me a favor sent me a text that simply read, "Andrew's trying to blame legal." Board's not buying it. They were scrambling. First, Andrew claimed Section 9D had been overlooked during the legal review because the team was short-staffed. Then he argued the client was overreacting and would come around with the right messaging. Next, he tried to suggest I had overstepped my authority by inserting that clause without approval. That last part almost made me laugh. Quietly. Bitterly. I heard later that someone on the board finally cut through the noise. Her name was Evelyn Shaw, sharp, strategic, and not known for wasting words. She had reviewed the contract personally. She raised her hand and said slowly, "Let's stop pretending this was an oversight." I distinctly recall a closed-door conversation weeks before the signing where Andrew explicitly said Olivia was becoming too visible, that her influence needed to be reduced. No one responded. I wasn't in that room. But my absence filled it. By 1:47 p.m. the final blow came. An email from DuPont Aerospace Holdings. Subject line, "Contract status, formal termination notice." The body was brutal in its clarity. Due to unapproved personnel changes in violation of Section 9, subsection D, DuPont Aerospace considers the contract null and void. All associated obligations are hereby dissolved. It wasn't just sent to Andrew and Natalie. It went to the investor relations team, the media contacts, and the private email addresses of every board member. That night I stayed late again. Not out of obligation. Out of curiosity. Andrew's door stayed shut. Natalie's office light never turned on. From my workstation I could hear the wall clock ticking in the hallway. I watched 3 different executives leave the building without their coats. One of them looked like he'd been crying. Someone from finance walked past and paused. "You doing okay?" she asked. Awkward but genuine. I nodded. "I'm fine." As I was. For the first time in weeks I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel powerless. I had written that clause. I had protected the client. They had ignored me. And now they were watching everything they'd built begin to crumble. There was no press release. No spin. Just silence, panic, and a void they couldn't explain away. And I sat in it. Uninvolved. Still here. It came at 8:52 a.m. on a Thursday. I was refilling my water bottle when my phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. Boston area code. I almost ignored it. I was exhausted from everything. But instinct told me to answer. "Olivia Randall?" a smooth voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "This is Derek Callahan from Hyperion Aerospace. We spoke several months ago. I believe the timing wasn't quite right then." I paused mid-step, letting the words land. "I remember," I said. "Well, I'm hoping the timing is better now," he continued. "I'd like to revisit our offer. With some significant upgrades." I walked slowly back to my workstation, the water bottle cool in my hand but already forgotten. Derek didn't waste time. He laid it all out with precision. Double my previous base salary. Equity participation. Relocation support if I wanted it, but also a dedicated office in their new Washington, D.C. headquarters, 4 blocks from Vanguard. And one more thing, he added, his voice dropping slightly. This wasn't just our idea. We were encouraged to reach back out. "By whom?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, "By Laurent DuPont. He called you a non-negotiable asset. Said the deal fell apart because you weren't in it. And he doesn't want the next one to happen unless you are." For a moment I didn't respond. I leaned back in the flimsy chair Vanguard had relegated me to and stared at the scuffed corner of my workstation wall. I remembered what it felt like to be erased. To be reduced to silence. To have my initials scratched out and replaced. And now here I was. Not begging. Not pitching. Being chosen. "Derek," I said slowly, "I appreciate the offer. But before we discuss numbers, I have a condition." "Of course," he replied quickly. "What do you need?" "I select my own team. I approve every hire under my division, especially in post-deal integration. No exceptions." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Done," he said. "Anything else?" "Yes," I added. I opened the drawer and pulled out the manila envelope I'd kept sealed since Antwerp. Inside was the handwritten note Laurent had slipped under my hotel room door that night. I reread it silently, my heartbeat steady this time. "I don't just want to oversee deals," I said. "I want full life cycle authority. From negotiation to implementation to renewal." "You'll have it," Derek answered. No hesitation. By the end of the call I hadn't said yes. But I hadn't said no either. I hung up, placed the phone face down on my desk and stared out the window at the Vanguard Aviation Systems tower across the street. The same glass building that had tried to contain me then erase me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclamation. About what happens when you don't just survive being erased. You become the name they can't move forward without. And this time I wasn't waiting for permission. I was the one making the call. It felt surreal. Sitting in a conference room overlooking Boston Harbor, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, leather portfolios arranged across a custom glass table. Same contract. Same jets. Same billion-dollar figures. But this time I wasn't just in the room. I was leading it. The pen in my hand felt heavier than usual. Maybe because it wasn't just ink anymore. It was a signature that meant everything had changed. "Ready when you are," Derek said, sliding the final agreement across the table. I looked down at the cover page. Total contract value, $1.35 billion client. DuPont Aerospace Holdings vendor. Hyperion Aerospace Executive Oversight. Olivia Randall. My name wasn't just on the document. It was embedded into its core function. DuPont had been explicit in their final draft. All stages of post-contract operations, logistics, compliance and client reporting must be managed directly by Olivia Randall. Substitution is not permitted. They weren't taking chances. And neither was I. When I signed, I didn't just close a deal. I reclaimed my place. Not at Vanguard but beyond it. I had left their building quietly. I had absorbed the humiliation. I had sat in silence while they rewrote history with someone else's name. Now I was signing the future without them. The press release went live at 9:47 a.m. full-page feature on Hyperion's homepage. Within minutes, Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal picked it up. Hyperion Aerospace secures landmark jet contract with DuPont Holdings. Former Vanguard executive leads new era of aviation strategy. I didn't check Vanguard's reaction. I didn't need to. But according to a text from someone still inside, Natalie saw the article on her phone during a strategy huddle. She froze mid-sentence. Andrew read it 20 minutes later in his private office. Neither one of them had known it was coming. No memo. No leak. Just a public unveiling they couldn't undo. There was no call from them. No message. Not even a polite congratulations. But I didn't want it. Because in that moment I didn't need an apology. I had the proof, on paper, in ink, in headlines. And the only thing more satisfying than being recognized was knowing they'd been replaced in silence. By the very person they erased. Me. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped out onto the executive floor of Hyperion's new DC headquarters. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Soft track lighting guiding the way forward. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the new card. Olivia Randall, Chief Global Officer, Hyperion Aerospace. 3 months ago my name had been erased from a door. Now it was engraved into the strategy that would shape an entire industry. As I walked toward the boardroom, I passed a glass-walled lounge where a large screen played muted news footage. I didn't stop, but I saw the headlines scroll across the ticker. Vanguard Aviation announces 230 job cuts amid failed deal fallout. CEO Andrew Hollis steps down. I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. I felt release. They had tried to shrink me. And now their empire was folding in on itself like wet paper. The very people who dismissed me had gambled on silence. But silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. My phone buzzed once in my hand. A text from Natalie. "Can we talk? I think I made a mistake." I looked at it for a moment. Then I locked the screen and slid it into my bag. No reply. No explanation. There was nothing left to say. I pushed open the boardroom door and stepped into a room of waiting executives. The energy shifted when I entered. In my hand was a new deal. $2.8 billion. A global supply and service agreement. And just like before, one clause written in plain language. All operations must remain under direct oversight of Olivia Randall. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about legacy. Not the kind they print in annual reports. The kind that echoes quietly in rooms where your name carries weight no title ever could. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, replaced by someone who never walked the road you paved, then you know what this moment feels like. And if you've made it through that storm, then I want you to remember this. You don't have to shout to win. You don't have to fight dirty to rise. Sometimes the most powerful comeback is when you say nothing and sign everything. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and if you've ever been replaced. I want to hear what happened. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in silence wondering if they matter. Let's remind them they do.